Hey guys, Nicholai I'm back at you with another response video, but this time it's less of a response and more of me um, giving a scripted video. This is a little bit more scripted than I normally do. Normally I'm pretty free-willing and talk as needed, but Jay Dyer gave me the excuse to talk about one of my favorite topics ever, and that is monarchism. He says here, everyone is a monarchist, whether you know it or not. Christ is King of Kings, and it shows Christ in his kingly garb. Um, and it's also very timely because the No Kings protest is happening. And uh, for me, it's very interesting to see the left use the moniker No Kings to attack Trump, who, if by any metrics, is not even close to acting like a king. He's not even close to what a true monarchist would want um, to advocate for. But I would like to give a thorough defense of the monarchism as a system, not just as a theological concept. Now, that being said, I think every good Orthodox person is a monarchist, and I think that every Christian, whether they want to admit it or not, is a monarchist. With that being said, I do think that some people argue, well, Christ is King of Kings, but that's like spiritual and not, and that doesn't mean that we need to support a monarchy temporally. But I would say that that's a flawed way of understanding it. And secondly, I think that monarchism has a lot of benefits and things that people don't really consider, mostly because we're not taught a proper history. The first problem is most people don't have any idea about the history of the Byzantium Empire or the Russian Empire and various other empires throughout history, and the benefits and the great things that they did policy-wise, let alone all of these other things. And what I'm going to try and do, and let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Um, there we go. I have this pulled up, so then I can pull it on over to here once we're ready. So we're going to go into this. It's going to be a little bit of a chunkier video, but I hope you guys will bear with me here. Before we get into that, please, if you want to support me, go down below. You can see I have a PayPal link down below. It's, I don't remember, at JYLewis 2016 or something like that. And then I also have a book, The Saints on Atheism, which is a book geared towards people that are younger in the faith, newer in the faith, and want a good, like, entry-level defense against atheism coming from the saints themselves. My bishop reviewed it and approved my sale of it, so if anyone's concerned about that, there's that. But other than that, I hope you guys really enjoy this and have a wonderful time and enjoy the content. The last thing that you can do to support us is we do have a business. If you need a website done, apps done, software done, IT services, if you need ticketing stuff done, if you need SEO, digital marketing, anything of that nature, my business does that. We have 3 people that are, well, 3 or 4 people that are involved in the business, and we're looking to expand. So if we get a couple more clients, we're going to be hiring some more people, potentially you if you're listening in on this. And we really want to keep on expanding so we can hire people who and not outsource cheap labor abroad. We don't do any of that, and we still come in cheaper than our competition, mind you. So go to www.monarchcybersolutions.net if you are interested in supporting that. And or if you know anybody who might need that and wants to go with someone who's trusted, who's a veteran, and is not going to gyp them. So thank you for listening to that little spiel. Let's get into the video. Okay, so what is the best form of government? We're told we have many choices: democracy, republicanism, communism, fascism. But all of that is kind of an illusion. When we strip away the labels and all these different ideologies, there's really only 2 fundamental types of government. There is monarchism, and then there is oligarchism, or monarchy versus oligarchy. And they're kind of on a spectrum, with oligarchy on one end, with monarchism on the other end. What is monarchism fundamentally? You have the rule of one, the monarch, a single sovereign individual who personifies the state, They are the personified representative of the state, the nation, or whatever else you can name on there. Now, there is an aristocratic class under them, but they are merely sort of like lower tier managers who are only given their authority because it comes from the king, not in spite of the king. So that needs to be remembered as well. On the other hand, you have the rule of the few, the oligarchy, a shifting, often hidden group of elites who govern in their own interests and often have no accountability to the people. Historically, if you look, every government in history is on the scale between these two poles. And today we will be making the case that monarchy is not a relic of the past, but the very engine that built the modern world, and a system on whose principles remain profoundly relevant even today. So let's start with the simple, undeniable fact. The modern world, with its nations, its technologies, its global connections, were all forged under monarchies. All of them. The Industrial Revolution, the single greatest leap in human productivity, did not happen under republics. It was primarily driven in Europe by European monarchs. The vast majority of the civilized world was ruled by kings and emperors. They provided the stability, the capital, and the long-term vision necessary for this monumental development. Monarchs built the railroads, they funded the explorers, they patronized the scientists who unlocked many different sciences and advanced medical innovations, all sorts of things. These were all funded by them. Secondly, on a cultural and religious standpoint, it was the aristocrats and the monarchs who provided the core of the spiritual and cultural bedrock for the nation. It was through the church. Now, the Byzantine Empire had a concept called symphonia, symphony between the church and the state. The king was still part of the church, but it was only through the church's approval that the king had their authority from God, right? And so there's this kind of symphony that happened. Now, even in pagan nations, we still saw a lot of success with monarchies. They just weren't as successful as a Christian monarchy would be because they're not rooted in the same undeniable truths and under the King of Kings, which is Christ. Now, I want to continue on here by highlighting some of the benefits. But how did monarchies achieve all of these things? By giving the people a centralized focus. Before the modern era, people's loyalties were local to their village, their tribe, or their feudal lord. The monarchy changed that. The crown became the living symbol of the nation itself. It was tangible, a human representation of what it meant to be English, French, Japanese, Russian, Roman. These unified identities transcended petty squabbles and created a shared sense of purpose. Now, that's not to say there were never petty squabbles. Humans are humans. It's just to say that it's oriented. It's the way that the nation is oriented, right? A national destiny that everyone could rally behind. No one wants to cheer for the other person's king, right? No one wants to cheer for the other person's king. They're cheering for their guy, even if he's flawed, right? And with that role in the nation's symbol came a sacred duty, the preservation of culture. A monarch is not just a political leader. They are the chief custodian of a nation's traditions, language, and heritage. Their very existence is linked to the past, while oligarchies are fleeting. I'm sorry, and I read that wrong. While oligarchies and fleeting republican governments often chase fads or seek to erase the past to build a quote-unquote new society, or they're constantly trying to progress, or constantly trying to gain more wealth at the expense often of the people. A constitutional monarchy, or just an absolute monarchy, frankly, provides stability and continuity. Now, I'm personally an absolute monarchist. I see no reason why we should try and use these hybrid forms of monarchy, but any form of monarchy that gives the monarch some power, doesn't need to have total power, but at least some power to influence the nation, and enough power to where they could be a thorn in the side of the oligarchs and the merchant class, is good. And we also notice this, that there is this natural tension between the monarch and the merchant class, and we'll get into that later. They ensure, monarchs, a timeless values ceremonies, identity of the people that are not lost to the shifting winds of political fashion. There's a divine endorsement as well. For the Eastern Orthodox Church, for instance, which overtly supports monarchy as the most natural form of government. Why? Because it reflects the divine order. Christ is King of Kings. Just as there is one God in heaven, having a single sovereign on earth mirrors the heavenly hierarchy. It is a system that acknowledges a higher authority and a natural order to creation, standing in stark contrast to the chaotic and often godless rule of committees and juntas. Or faceless bureaucrats and corporate elites. Now let's address the most common objections. What about tyranny? The fear of the bad king is real, but the monarchist system has built-in checks and balances that are often more effective than an oligarchy. First, accountability. In a monarchy, you always know who's in charge. There is no hiding behind party label, a bureaucratic committee, or term limits. The blame and the credit land squarely on one person. This clarity creates immense pressure for good governance. Second, the most crucial is the incentive structure. An oligarch's wealth is often mobile and detached from the land. They can loot a country and move their money to a Swiss bank account. But a monarch is different. Their land is the nation. Their wealth is the nation. Their palaces, their forests, their historical treasures, they're all intrinsically tied to the wealth and prosperity of the country itself. If a nation thrives, the royal house thrives. If a nation falls into poverty and ruin, the monarch loses everything. Their personal interest is perfectly aligned with the national interest. Furthermore, oftentimes, especially historically, we saw that if a monarch did start aiding and abetting foreign interests, their heads often ended up on pikes by the very people who were holding them accountable. And finally, considering the practical limits of power, history shows that bad kings usually have very short reigns. Their excesses provoked immediate and decisive responses from rebellious nobles, from the army, or from the people. A single tyrant can only exert so much control. Their reach is limited. But an oligarchic tyranny that is far more terrifying and resilient beast. A faceless bureaucracy, a deep state, a political party that has no single head to cut off. It can persist for generations and grind down dissent slowly and systematically. We see this in America. Modern America, as it's become less centralized and less authoritarian in nature, has become more bureaucratic and has more and more deep state and oligarchy. When the president had more authority, we saw less of these issues. Which, again, that's a principle of monarchism, is more authority to one individual, right? It distributes tyranny across thousands of complicated hands, the oligarchy. It makes it almost impossible to root out. The cruelty of a committee can be far more vast and insidious than the wrath of a single man. So we're left with a choice, not between perfection and imperfection, but between two systems with very different strengths and weaknesses. On one hand, a monarchy, a system of national unity, cultural preservation, and clear accountability and incentives for long-term prosperity. On the other hand, oligarchy, the rule of a few, often disguised with the interests that are rarely your own. The modern world was built by king and queens. Perhaps, in seeking solutions for the future, we shouldn't be so quick as to dismiss the pillar that supported our past. So what do you guys think down below? Is the crown a key to stability and prosperous future? Share your thoughts down below. Now, before we move on, I do have a fantastic thing to show you just how effective and great some of the policies monarchism can have. I'm going to bring forward this webpage now. Now, this webpage right here is a blog by Tsar Nicholas II. It's 70 facts about Tsar Nicholas II and his reign. And we're going to go over some of the facts that are relevant to like economy and policy, not necessarily some of the facts about some of these other things. Tsar Nicholas II received the best military and legal education. He served in the army as the rank of colonel, and when high-standing members of the military tried to convince him to take the rank of general, Nicholas agreed, "Answer, gentlemen, you need not worry about my rank. You better be thinking about rising through the ranks yourselves." So he clearly understood his place. Let's continue. Here it is. Tsar Nicholas II and his family donated hundreds of thousands of rubles at the time to a large number of causes, helping renovate Russia's medical equipment, building new hospitals, primary and vocational schools, maternity wards, and orphanages. Tsar Nicholas II granted pardons to nearly all clemency applications that were submitted during his reign. There were 120 times fewer death sentences pronounced under him than during Stalin's rule. The number of convicts during Nicholas II's reign was considerably lower than that of the USSR or today's Russian Federation. In 1908, there were 56 convicted criminals per 100,000 people in the population. In 1949, this is during the USSR, this number rose to 1,537 in 100,000. In 2011, which it's improved since then, so it's continually improving since the fall of the Soviet Union, it's 555 to 100,000. That's still very high. Now, 2011, that's a long time ago, so I'm sure it's improved since then, but 56 to 555 is still a significant jump. In 1903, the number of government functionaries was 163 to 100,000 in the population. So that just means how many government employees, essentially. In 2010, less than 100 years after his death, the figure was 1,153 to 100,000 people. That's basically 1 to 1,000. I mean, sorry, 1 to 100. That one government employee for every 100 people is insane, right? And America is not far behind that, actually. So it's not just a commentary on the on communism. This is also equally applicable to our form of government in America. So this is funny. When the members of the provisional government, the transitionary government between the USSR and the monarchy, were considering the possibility of accusing the emperor of treason, one of them suggested making his private correspondences with the empress public, to which he was told, "We can't do that. If we do, the Russian nation will worship them as saints." That's because if anyone, by the way, everyone should, read the diaries of Tsar Nicholas II between him and his family to him and each other, they are you can't come away without them claiming that they were essentially saints. He secured Europe's largest empire that few rivals in its military and economic power. The prosperity either before or after his reign. They never reached the same heights in the USSR. The USSR was benefited from modernity. It didn't necessarily benefit from good economic policy. The Russian Orthodox Church was the second largest in the world at the time. It numbered 53,000 churches, or 54,000 churches, and 1,000 monasteries. The Russian Empire alone was situated in every corner of the vast country. The Russian Orthodox Church enjoyed considerable influence in the Holy Land and offered guidance to all Orthodox Christians in Europe, Asia, and even Africa. The construction and renovation of churches was financed by the state or supported directly by funds from Tsar Nicholas II. The emperor himself took part in laying down the first cornerstones and consecrations of many churches. He subsidized the church, increasing from 300 rubles in 1908 to 500 million rubles, 53 million rubles. We're going to continue to the more... under his reign, the Russian population had grown by 62 million. So a huge jump in population. That's congruent with prosperity. Most of the time when you see vast, very rapid population growth, that's correlated with prosperity and people's happiness. In 1897, Tsar Nicholas approved the imperial census, the first and only census carried out by the Russian Empire. In the census, he put the occupation, wrote owner of the Russian land. In the beginning of the 20th century, the judicial reforms of Tsar Nicholas II were firmly established through the empire, and they were considered, even by William Taft and others, to be fantastic judicial reforms. They were considered phenomenal. By today's standards, we would be very happy with them compared to our modern corrupt judicial system that we experience in the West. He shortened compulsory military service to 3 years and 5 years in the Navy. The percentage of conscripts were the lowest in Russia out of all countries involved in military action. This was during World War I. The Peasants' Land Bank offered large loans to farmers. By 1914, Russian peasants and farmers owned or rented 100% of all agricultural land in Siberia and Asian part of Russia, 90% in the European zones. In Siberia, special state-owned depots provided local population with agricultural equipment. Who could complain about that? The total number of taxes in Russia of 1913 was half that of France and Germany and a quarter that of Britain. In modern standards, it was laughably low compared to what we owe today on the average in America. The Russian population kept getting richer. The wages of Russian workers were on par with those of Europe, second only to those of American counterparts. Starting June 1903, all industrialists were obliged to pay monthly allowance and pensions to all workers injured in industrial accidents and their families. The amount of such allowance was set to 50 to 66% of an injured person's needs. The country's first trade unions were formed in 1906. A law of June 20, 1912 introduced obligatory health and incidence insurance for workers. Some of the earliest in the world to adopt this, by the way. Something we take for granted today. The Russian law on obligatory social insurance was one of the first of its kind in the world, preceding that of the United States and some leading European countries. Russia was one of the most progressive labor legislations of the time. According to some sources, American President William Taft commended Russians on saying no democratic state boasted such a perfect labor legislation as the one conceived by your emperor. On the 15th of 1897, Emperor Nicholas II issued a decree prohibiting work in factories and enterprises on Sundays and holidays. Imagine having that in today's society. We couldn't even fathom it because the GDP would go down. There would be a conniption fit by Wall Street. Prices of homegrown produce was the lowest in the world. During Tsar Nicholas II's reign, the country's budget grew almost threefold, despite having some of the lowest taxes in the world. The reign of Tsar Nicholas II was characterized by debt-free state budget. Government revenues exceeded government spending in the pre-war era. So obviously during the war there was some debts. The state excess of revenues expenditures was 2.4 billion rubles. Public finances flourished as a result of the debt-free budget. Redemption payments for peasants were canceled. So peasants didn't even have to pay back their loans because they had such a great debt-free budget and so much surplus. Railway tariffs were lowered and some taxes were completely eliminated. The adoption of the gold standard and this is something that every libertarian drools over, the adoption of the gold standard during the monetary reforms in 1986 resulted in a much stronger ruble. According to the country's finance minister at the time, Sergei Witte, Russia was solely Emperor Nicholas II to thank for the introduction of the gold currency. Between 1894 and 1914, the amount of household deposits in saving banks increased sevenfold. The amount of deposits and equity deposited in small credit institutions increased 17 times. Deposits in joint stock commercial banks between 1895 and 1915 increased 13 times. The grounds for obligatory education were laid in 1908, aimed at achieving 100% literacy. By 1916, the percentage of literate Russians more than doubled, from 21.1% to 56%, and that's very great. That's a huge jump. By the beginning of the First World War, Russia had over 100 higher education facilities that numbered over 150,000 students, placing Russia in a shared third place in the world with Great Britain. The financing of education grew from 25 million to 161 million rubles. That's not counting council schools, whose financing had grown by 70 million to 300 million. In total, the education budget grew 628%. The number, and by the way, again, liberals drool over this, conservatives wish. The number of secondary school students grew from 224,000 to 700,000. The number of university students doubled, and the number of all children attending grew from 3 million to 6 million. In the early 1900s, the introduction of free medicine. All Russian nationals had a right to free medical help they received through checkups followed by a detailed consultations. The Russian system of municipal medicine had been the largest achievement of our time in the field of social medicine. It offers free medical help available to anyone and has considerable awareness rising value. According to the Swiss professor Frederick, Russia was second in Europe and third in the world for the number of qualified doctors. Kindergartens, maternity wards, orphanages, overnight shelters for the homeless mushroomed all over Russia. Now this is interesting. Everyone says, oh, the Russian Empire was a backwater. No, it wasn't. Listen to this. Industry grew rapidly, raising the gross domestic product 4 times in the period of 1890 to 1913. Coal mining grew 500%, iron smelting 400% within 20 years. Copper and magnesium mining grew 500% within the same period. Investment capital and engineering factories grew 80%. The total length of railroads and telegraph lines doubled within 20 years. The Russian river fleet doubled as well. Industry rapidly became mechanized. In 1901, Russia produced 12 million tons of crude oil, compared to the 9 million in the United States. So they were outproducing the United States despite us having the quote-unquote superior system. In periods from 1908 to 1913, the growth of labor efficiency outpaced that of the United States, Germany, and Great Britain, the top-ranking industrial giants in the world at the time. Nicholas II's activity resulted in remarkable economic stability. As the world plunged into the depths of economic crisis, Russia preserved its momentum. Everyone remembers 1911 to 1912 was a major recession at the time. Worldwide recession. Crude oil manufacturers paid a special tax on their activities, which was then used to advance domestic production. In 1914, Russia sent a group of 200 military engineers and War Department workers in the United States in order to advance its heavy armaments industry. Russia hit the top list of countries in national income growth, increased in labor efficiency, and concentration of production. It became one of the biggest exporters of textiles, a major steel and non-ferrous industry manufacturer, and one of the biggest machine manufacturers and coal mining countries in the world. Russia became the world's largest exporter of grains, cereals, dairy products. Its grain crops were 1/3 larger than combined of the United States, Canada, and Argentina, who are known for these things. We're known for that. All 3 of those countries are known for it. Grain production doubled. Its combined yield 12%. Cattle stock grew 60%. Russia had more horses than any other country and was also one of the biggest breeders of cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Under his rule, he added a bunch of territories. Tsar Nicholas strove to remain unbiased, impartial to various lobbying interests. Many economic reformers as well as anti-alcohol campaigns were conceived and controlled personally by the emperor, sometimes against the Duma's judgment. The amount of freedom of speech and press was larger than any other time in Russian history, before and after his reign. Russia's gold reserves became the largest in the world, making the ruble the hardest currency. Russia boasted one of the fastest growing rail systems in the world. The length of miles of track increased from 31,000 miles to 50,000 miles, and that is in less than 12 years. We would be envious to even achieve that today. There's no way. With all the bureaucracy we have to deal with, and the oligarchy, and all of the government politicians pocketing money along the way, it's just absolutely insane. Nicholas II personally supervised and controlled the building and completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway. Russia possessed one of the numerically strongest and quickest developing armies. It employed many rifles. It improved many different types of weapons. It had some of the most advanced weaponry in the world at the time. By the time of its creation in 1910, the Russian Air Force possessed 263 aircraft, which made it the biggest in the world at the time. By autumn 1917, the number had increased to 700. Now, remember, this is World War I era, so... the Imperial Russian Navy was second only to the British and the Germans. The Nicholas II was the originator of the first Hague Peace Conference and its permanent court of arbitration. In 1901, the emperor was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in his recognition for his efforts to limit armaments and promote peace amongst great powers. Tsar Nicholas II was famously very, very distraught over the fact of the war in Europe. He was very distraught over it. Russia's per capita alcohol consumption was one of the lowest in Europe, second to only Norway, culminating in Nicholas's introduction of the Prohibition Law in 1914, and it worked, by the way, so much for prohibition being not effective. The numbers of mentally ill persons was estimated to be 187 per 100,000. In 2010, this figure topped at 5,598 to 100,000. There's not really good numbers on the USSR. They didn't really keep track of that stuff very much. Suicides were 4.4 per 100,000 in 1912. It's 29 in 2009. Now, these things have all been improving under the Russian Federation, but it's still not near. I mean, the USSR was bad, so anything is an improvement from there, to be fair. Both inflation and unemployment were non-existent, although the dwindling amount of agricultural land forced many farmers to seek employment in cities. So yeah, as less farmland was available, some farmers gave up that lifestyle and moved to the cities, various cities. The crime rate was comparable to that of the United States and European countries. They had great art. His reign was a golden age of Russian science and philosophy. Russia became the first in the world to invent many things, including many other things: wireless radio transmission, helicopter, television. Russia became one of the leading manufacturers of motor cars and motorcycles, zeppelins, and double-deckers. In 1902, the Russian engineer Boris, I can't even pronounce that name, created the first six-cylinder engine when he then supplied with the Daimler, including racing the Mercedes. Russia's motor car industry at the time rivaled that of Germany. Its aircraft production was comparable to America. Russian steam engines were among the best in the world. They were known for their strength and reliability, successfully competing in prestigious contests like Monte Carlo and San Sebastian rallies. Anyways, all of the above are just things that you can read. That was long, but it's important to emphasize that's one monarch. But all of the monarchs at that time period saw fairly comparable success. Under the Kaiser with Germans, under the Japanese emperor, or the shogun, which was kind of a dual ruling. China even advanced rapidly, though they saw some stumbling when with the opioid epidemic and also with the Japanese attacking. But needless to say, China saw great leaps and bounds over its long centuries of monarchism. Britain as well. Now, Britain's monarch was kneecapped in a lot of ways. They were much less influential as time went on, which was very unfortunate. They just were simply put, they were just not effective in the long run. They released too much of their power. They didn't have enough ability to influence the oligarchy beneath them, which is unfortunate. Brazil, one of the best times in Brazil's history was under the monarchy. When Brazil was under, people don't realize this, but Brazil had a monarch who voluntarily gave up rule, even though he was well beloved and liked. Brazil was a rising power at the time. Unfortunately, they released it, right? And the more monarchs throughout Europe have released more of their power, the less successful they've been. Now, another great example of a modern success story for a monarchy, it's a small country, but it's still worth mentioning, is Bhutan. Bhutan is a highly successful country for its size, for its relative industrial capacity, for its relative wealth and size of its population. It's very successful. So these are all examples of a consistent metric of showing that monarchism in principle can work in modernity because Tsar Nicholas II shows that. His policies were very modern. So there's no reason why they wouldn't have continued on to be successful as time went on. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is a longer one, and I apologize for that, but let me know what you think down below.